Alright, in this video clip I'm going to show you how to sew cuffs and bands to be put onto things like sweaters or jogger style pants. When you have a cuff or a band, it needs to be able to stretch. So if you have a self fabric that's quite stretchy, you can use the self fabric, which is what I did in the case of this sweater here, to put on the ends of the sleeves, the hem, and around the neckline. If your fabric isn't super stretchy, ribbing is a better answer, and ribbing has enough stretch that when you put your hand through the cuff or your head through the hole of the neckline, it will stretch enough that you won't snap the seams. So the first thing, I want my hem band here to look like this one. So all I've done here is I've matched my right sides of my fabric together, and I've pinned down both sides of the side seams. This one I've already constructed, so I'll just take these pins out just to speed things up. So once you've pinned both the sides, you're going to go to your machine. And I always like to baste my pieces first, so stitch length 4. And I'm going to baste in the seam allowance. So I'm going to follow just maybe sort of a little bit inside where my seam allowance actually is. So this one has a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I'm just going to do a quick baste at maybe about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric. No need to reverse when you're basting, this is just going to be temporary. Okay, so now I'm actually going to serge just like I did on this side. So on the serger, you want to be careful not to cut off excess fabric. So I'm going to follow, if you can see in the camera here, just the inside edge where the serger makes this 90-degree angle. I'm going to line up my fabric right there. So I'm not going to be cutting anything off. Alright, so at this point I've serged, basted first, just to make sure my edges are together, and then serged down the sides of both of the hem band. Now, if you have a cuff as well, like you see here, typically the cuff is not 2 pieces. Typically on a cuff piece, you just make the right sides match, and you pin. You would do the exact same thing, baste down this one side, serge down this one side. Then we're going to head over to the iron here to do a little bit of pressing. So at the iron, when you're pressing, I like to press the seams both the same way. And in this case, I'm going to press the seams towards the front of the band, just because on my sweater I've pressed the side seams towards the back. And if your side seams are going in opposite directions, you'll find when you sew the band on, it's a little bit easier to sew it on, a little bit less bulky. So both my side seams are going towards the front of the band. Your next step, you're going to fold the band in half. And I like to put the band right onto the ironing board. It's a little bit easier. So you're folding the band in half, and then you're pressing the folded edge. I'm going to turn down my heat just a little bit here. So as you're doing this, you're making sure your edges are matching. You want to be careful also that you're not stretching the fabric, so a press is preferred to something like an iron where you would be moving the fabric around. You may also notice that the fabric changes color a little bit when you press it, and that's just due to the dye in the fabric. That's a temporary look that will go away once the fabric has cooled down again. Now if you're doing something like a cuff, the cuff is very small. You won't be able to fit it onto the end of the ironing board. So for something like the cuff, I usually use a sleeve roll, and a sleeve roll looks like this, And depending on the width of your cuff, you may be able to slip the cuff onto the sleeve roll, like so, to press that same crease on the folded edge. Alright, so I have my band, it's folded in half. We now need to pin and quarter. So we're going to head back to our pins here. So in order to make sure that this band, which is slightly smaller than the actual body, fits onto my project perfectly, I'm going to quarter it with pins. So I'm going to put a pin on both of the side seams to start, making sure to keep those edges that you've pressed together. So pins directly in the side seam. After you pin the side seam, to quarter it, you're going to put those two pins together, and then you're going to find the halfway point. Quartering just means dividing the edge that's open into 4 equal parts. Alright, so once I've quartered my band, the seams on the side are going to line up with the side of my garment here. So I'm going to quarter the garment as well. So I'm going to match my side seams and finding the quarter line the exact same way on my garment as I just did with my hem band. Alright, so this is a quarter, 1 quarter, and another quarter. So now I need to match my hem band, the pins that I've pinned in my hem band, to the quarter marks on my shirt. So I'm going to put my hem band on top of the shirt, like so. So my raw edges here are matching. The folded edge is close to the top edge of the garment. And now I'm going to pin. So I'm matching the pins, the quarter mark pins together, and as I do that I can take out the excess pins. So here I have the side seams, and when I get to the side seam I want to make sure that the band seams are going forward and the body seam is going towards the back, so that when I put them together there's not a lot of bulk there. I also want to make sure that those seams line up, so if you can see in the camera, I want to make sure that those lines are lined up directly with each other before I pin it. Here's my center back mark. Again, matching the raw edges together, the cut edges. And then coming over to our last side seam. And again, you can see there's my seam line. I want to make sure that that's directly matching before I secure my pin in. Another way you can do it, find a pin that's straight, you can stab the pin in on the seam line here. It should come out right on the stitching line on the other side. Then you can stab the pin back in on the stitching line, and it should come back out right on your seam line on the outside. And if it doesn't quite come out there, you can wiggle it and get it just right. So at this point, you can see there's excess fabric. The band is always going to be smaller than the actual shirt. So you have to stretch this now in order to pin the rest of it. And this is where it's a little bit challenging unless you have 2 people. So at this point, I actually find it easiest to go back to my machine with my pins, and I'm going to use my machine to help me pin this section.